My fellow exiles, welcome and well met. There are a ton more questions answered by Jonathan about Path of Exile 2 in anticipation of his interview with Kriparian tonight at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. We're going to go over all the questions he has answered on the subreddit, and we are, of course, going to be covering Jonathan's interview with Kriparian tonight. There's going to be a video on it on this channel. It's going to recap everything. I hope to see you there. Anyways, let's get right to it. So yeah, last night Jonathan came in and answered a ton of questions here on the subreddit. We are going to start with, can we please have a look at the Mercenary's face? Since customization doesn't allow for face tweaks, it'd be nice to know what the character looks like. Please no mustache. Man, you gotta wait. Path of Exile 2 comes out in about 6 months. You're gonna be able to see it. And oh wow, Jonathan says, sure, why not? So we get to see the Mercenary's face for the first time here. Oh wow, he looks pretty rustic. Man, who does he look like? I feel like he looks like some famous actor, but it's escaping my mind presently. Regardless, he's got a goatee going on, longer hair, kind of like myself. In the background of his character select, we can see some Karui symbols right here, some carvings, some hanging people. Oh, how fantastic. And a campfire. Are they going to have a campfire? Is this Act 1? I'm guessing this is Act 1's character select screen. It looks like the select screen changes based on the act, based on what we've seen of the betas so far. So I'm guessing that Acts 1 through 6 have their own unique character select. This is Act 1, and then the end game will probably have its own as well. Very nice. The aesthetic here is beautiful. Look at the shadows and the light reflecting on his armor, the crossbow, the way his hands are holding it. I mean, phenomenal. Awesome. I can't believe that we actually saw this guy. Bro, this image is so cool and badass at the same time. So that's the character selection screen. It gives me Vampire D2 combo vibes. And Jonathan says, that is the background for characters in Path of Exile 1. Okay, so I could have just came back here and read this. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jonathan, for answering. I love being able to see one of the characters. I wonder when we'll see the rest of them. Okay, this is the next question. Kebab Cardio asks, will we be able to chat in-game with people that are on different POE1 or POE2 player-based division? So essentially asking, are we going to be able to chat between games? Jonathan says, it is my intention to allow this. The integration of POE1 and POE2 realms is work that is ongoing, but this is one of the planned features. Wow, that's spectacular. That will be a little confusing though, I won't lie. People linking items from Path of Exile 2 to Path of Exile 1 players and vice versa. It's very interesting that they would like to allow that. I wonder if that means that there will be specific chat channels wherein that's feasible, because you wouldn't want to throw a new player into a chat channel where they can see stuff from Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2. That just seems like it would confuse people heavily. So maybe it's something that you can either opt into or specifically go out and find within chat. That's awesome that they're thinking about this though. I'm happy to hear it. Next up, Anliev asks, are there full suites of elemental skill gems per weapon type? And then they go in depth. Since weapon-based skills are no longer universal and are instead specific per weapon type, the choice of weapon determines what attack skill gems you will be using. Say I picked a particular weapon type. Would there be a complete suite of fire, cold, lightning, chaos, and physical spear skill gems for me to select from and make a build around? Or would some elements be unaccounted for depending on the weapon type? For example, we have seen some spear skills of varying elements, but I don't think we've seen any associated with chaos. If the answer to this question is yes, then we'd expect there to be at least one chaos spear skill gem that has not been revealed yet. Now, before I read Jonathan's answer, I will say, if they don't have a full suite, this leaves tons of room for expansion in the future with new skill gems, and that was always one of the coolest parts of a new Path of Exile 1 league. Jonathan does respond, and he says, we intend to have skills for multiple elements for each weapon type, but maybe not always every element. For example, the quarterstaves with the monk. We have a well-developed lightning, cold, and physical wind-themed set, but we don't have a developed fire set. While this is not always respected, fire is loosely aligned with strength as an attribute, and it's the exact opposite in terms of attribute alignment with monk, being dex int. I still try to add a bit of synergy just for kicks though. We have skills that interact with elemental ailments, and we make sure to include a burning interaction just in case someone wants to try and make a build with it. Interesting answer from Jonathan that they're going to try to respect attributes in terms of skill development. I'm shocked that he didn't actually mention what I said. It leaves them tons of room for expansion in the future, and new skill gems really hype people up for new updates. I do understand what they're going for with the different themes, but I think in a game like Path of Exile, you don't need to follow those themes. You can have fire skills on classes that aren't aligned with strength, even when it comes to weapon types, right? And I do think as the game progresses, this theme will fade a little bit. Interesting Ask 1978 says, somebody might try to make a frenzied fire monk character. Please don't let it remain just in their imagination. I think that person is thinking of making that. Ilyu Erstika asks, skills with built-in movement and WASD. I was wondering if some of the skills we've already seen will be revisited, tweaked due to the implementation of WASD movement. It seems like the introduction of this new movement system might have an impact on how certain skills with built-in movement function. The Sorceress's comment spell, for example. I'm curious if the float back part of the spell might be influenced by the WASD controls now, instead of relying on the cursor's position relative to the player character. Jonathan responds and says, generally speaking, if the skill allowed you to control movement direction by holding the mouse before, and in POE2, many skills allow this, then you control it with WASD also. Fantastic. Hopefully it's going to be a seamless transition wherein you can just swap between mouse WASD depending on the skill you're using, depending on the playstyle that you're going for. And this really does seem to be one of the biggest features that people are excited for in the current Path of Exile community, and that probably means it's going to bring in a huge new swath of players who are excited and able to use WASD instead of that mouse cursor movement. Ooh, here's a juicy one, Exiles. FlopPanther33781 asks, so how do you think skill and Flask mapping is going to work if you use WASD? I like the idea of having WASD because I'm used to that from many other games, but I'm not sure how well it's going to integrate with skills and flasks. Skills would have to be remapped because of the W key, but where would you remap them to? If you're using the mouse for aiming, most mouses only have 3 buttons, so either you're going to need to buy a gaming mouse with many other buttons, or we're going to have to come up with some other solution. Similar thing with flasks. Using them is easy when using QWERT for the skills, but using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 when using WASD isn't going to be as fluid, and more importantly, you may not always be able to use the flask you want while moving in the direction you want, which could lead to deaths. I think one of the videos mentioned roll being mapped to the spacebar, so I guess you could flask while rolling. But that could use up about a second of the flask's buff-debuff timer, which might be the difference between living and dying in some cases. But I think it's even more important to note how less comfortable or fluid it is to reach from the WASD keys to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keys, especially if you're trying to move while using a flask. Now, Jonathan does respond somewhere here. Right here. By default, the skills that were QWERT are now QERFT. Of these, T is certainly the most annoying, and I tend to avoid putting anything there I need often. I haven't found this to be an issue in practice. Typically, the skills that have more of a doing in motion type aspect to them, you put on the mouse. You have 3 buttons there. Then, the other skills tend to be more of the style where you use them at the right moment, and those work just fine on the other keys. So, I love that Jonathan does say this isn't a perfect solution. This is kind of an issue, that we have all of these skills that we're trying to pack into this one area of the keyboard, and it's going to be different from Path of Exile 1. However, there does seem to still be the fact that there's going to be a primary skill that you use while on the move, while you're clearing packs, while you're facing the bulk of that boss fight, and then in reaction to other things that happen around you, you have QERFT. Or you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for your flasks. Because remember, flasks aren't going to be the flask piano that we see until we get Instilling Orbs or a Mage Blood in Path of Exile 1. They are going to be reactionary. Health flasks, shield flasks, and mana flasks, if not many other types that they haven't introduced to us yet. They're not going to be like they are in POE1, so we do have to keep that in mind while we're thinking about all the extra buttons that we think that we're going to have to press. And it's time for another one. Umentis asks, sorry if this has already been confirmed or not. Are guilds carrying over or working between POE1 and 2? I have recently made a guild with a few friends, and we are wanting to get some guild stashes. We know personal stash tabs are carrying over, but are guilds and any guild stash tabs also carrying over? Jonathan says guilds will transfer. Guild tabs will transfer. It is our intention that chat will work within the guild across POE1 and 2 as well. Oh, so that answers the question that I had earlier. This won't be something then that you have to seek out, this cross-chat functionality. It's something that will be built within the usual chat channels. That's going to be really interesting, I'm not gonna lie. Linking items from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2 players, talking about various things in POE2 that might have different meanings in POE1. That's going to be interesting, and I'd posit lead to a lot of confusion. Okay, and here's a post right here that I've already highlighted on the channel, and the fact that I reacted to all of these boss fights. Jonathan actually responded to one of the boss fights in particular, the Carrion Crone. And if you don't remember what the Carrion Crone looked like, it was this one, the one that Quinn couldn't beat. So you see she has that Nova attack there, she's shooting out those shards there. Quinn just couldn't do it. He couldn't even get any damage in on her, right? And despite that, Jonathan actually says, of these, Carrion Crone stands out as lame for sure. Probably one of the earliest tier 3 bosses we made in POE2, and she hasn't aged well. It's a remnant of the old way we made uniques in areas, which was take a monster from the area and make a reskin and add a couple more abilities. We have come a long way since. Yeah, that's evident. She will need an upgrade before beta. So that's interesting. Quinn's gonna have a super rough time with that creature. Now somebody else, Professional Ear 6033, asks, what does each tier mean? Tier 1 for act bosses, tier 2 for quest bosses, and tier 3 for optional bosses? Savings Triacle says tier 0 act boss, T1 mid act boss, T2 hard zone boss, T3 easy zone boss. They didn't lay out the tiers, but Mark uses the nomenclature during the monsters and boss talks, and I think based on that, the above tiers are close. Tiers were tied to difficulty, not quests. And then this person found 3 mentions of it at 950, 1002, and 2417, and Jonathan actually confirms it's something like that. Just internal usage, which is mostly used for drop balance, based on how hard the boss is supposed to be. As a general rule, a tier 3 should be twice as hard as a rare in the same zone. Tier 2 is twice as hard as a tier 3, and so on. So very interesting. I don't know how many of the T0 or tier 1 bosses we've seen yet. I know we haven't seen any tier 0, and I'm super excited for that. If you haven't seen the reaction of all these boss fights, make sure you go watch it. It's on the channel. I'll link it right now in the video somewhere on the screen. Next up, we actually have a question about PoE Mobile. Seasmaster 3000 asks, PoE Mobile launch date. Will PoE Mobile or its beta launch alongside the PoE2 beta in summer, or will we have to wait for the full release of PoE2? I really want to see PoE Mobile to succeed because I hate those pay-to-win games that are all over the Play Store, and I want to test it out myself ASAP. Jonathan says, wow, mobile is taking a bit of a backseat at the moment. Don't expect to see it until well after PoE2's release. That is insane. Now, other people would push that up to before PoE2. They'd make sure it releases as soon as possible. They are not doing that. Awesome. They're letting it cook. We'll see it when we see it, and that's going to be after Path of Exile 2. Next up, MCG123457, wow, that's tricky, asks, will there be any changes to mod pools and mod requirements in PoE2? We have heard the devs talk multiple times about making it so that it is possible for items that are just picked up off the ground to be very good again, and to encourage players to identify more items. But how will this be achieved, and how will GGG encourage players to actually pick up rares and identify them? In POE1, the mod pools are too diluted, which makes it extremely rare that any given dropped rare will roll onto a usable item. But even then, there are so few filler mods that removing them will do nothing. I imagine GGG will either further specialize item bases, or to somehow dynamically remove undesired mods from the pool. Jonathan responds to this somewhere on here. Yes, I have a lot to say about this topic, but it will have to wait until a later time. We will have a big discussion on the details of item drops at some point next year before beta though. Okay, so within the next 6 months, Jonathan will be talking about the loot in Path of Exile 2, and it is changing drastically from POE1. That's good to hear. I like picking up items off the ground and identifying them, and I like crafting. Both can exist at the same time. Okay, we've got a question from Great Cow 295. Stun mechanics in PoE2. So as someone who enjoys melee combat, I'm a bit worried on how stun and animation locks are going to affect our characters in POE2. Currently in POE1, you have to be completely stun immune in order to even stand a chance in endgame, and this makes stun threshold completely worthless. How will stun and animation locks work in POE2 with the flow of combat? Will stun threshold actually be something we will have to figure out in our builds as a defensive layer? With that being said, I am not a fan of being completely immune to stun locks because I think it makes the devs balance around it, i.e. POE1 but a way to scale the threshold, especially for melee builds, would be quite nice and a change of how we build our characters as a whole. So somebody responds and says, I'm also curious about this. Playing the warrior demo at ExileCon, stun was a huge issue and I'm not sure how to build around it if things like stun immunity and health scaling aren't available. Jonathan responds to this and says, at ExileCon, there was an unintentional issue with stun. When we added poise to monsters, players also had it too, but we didn't consider that monsters would build up to a stun on the player too. This meant that small attacks would often stun you. We changed the way poise works on characters after ExileCon. Basically, it starts draining instantly and at a high rate. You can only be stunned by small attacks if a significant number of them arrive at the same time. So while Jonathan answers that guy's question about the bug, he doesn't actually answer this question. So I'm guessing that stun and building up stun immunity is going to be present in POE2 as something on your items, as something on the passive skill tree, something that's built into ascendancies, and that it's going to be another defensive layer, just as it is in Path of Exile 1. Now, before we close out this video, I do have two other things that I'd like to showcase. They're not questions from GGG or for GGG, they're from me. So I am essentially working on a video that is going to rank all the most anticipated features for Path of Exile 2. I have posed this question to two communities so far. That is the Path of Exile 2 subreddit, in which we got about 50 responses that I'm going to compile together, and of course the YouTube community via the community tab right here. So while I've asked into those two groups, I'd also like to pose the question to all of you. What exactly, in your eyes, is the most impactful change from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2? This is the concept we should be sharing with old players, new players, and potential exiles. Really, what might it be? Please let me know in the comments below. I want to understand what the hype is from everybody's perspective. It looks like there's a lot of WASD, there's a lot of slower combat and movement, there's gems, there are the items, there are the over 100 unique bosses. There's a lot going on here, and I'd love to hear from all of you why you're excited for Path of Exile 2. Anyways, that's all for this video. Talamoana, Exiles.